Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is another edition of Journey on My Mind. I'm Dave Verhaagen.
Yeah.
I'm Sam Barnhart. Yeah.
You are?
Suzie, Lind, Lauren, King.
There we go.
Nailed
Yes.
it.
It feels like Sesame Street, where they do the parts of the word.
Yeah.
But see, with Dave Verhaagen, people are like, Dave Verhaagen?
Uh-huh.
All
Yeah.
right. So we have to do Dave Verhaagen.
Make it
But
clear.
we are so glad Susie's back with us.
Me
This
too.
Yeah.
is a continuation of a conversation we had last time, and we were talking about loneliness and social isolation and being alone, and we talked about how that affects people both emotionally, also physically, spiritually.
Yeah.
So we thought we needed a follow-up conversation about it to talk about what does building a social network in adulthood look like.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're going to talk about for a few minutes. I'm curious for you guys, if you can think of a relationship, a friendship that you've built as an adult outside of church, like not through a church contact, but is there any relationship that wasn't from, let's say, high school or college years, but was an adult relationship and it wasn't a connection through church? Anybody have one that comes to mind?
And yeah.
Suzie?
I mean, the most recent one that I've been enjoying a lot is with my neighbor.
Okay.
Her name's Krista. Shout out to Krista. I don't
Krista.
think she's going to listen, but
Maybe.
maybe she might actually listen.
You
to
never
this.
know.
I'm going to tell her to
Yeah,
listen
say,
now.
you can tell.
If you give me your contact information,
Yeah.
I'll tell her to listen.
Well, she lives in my neighborhood, and our sons are besties,
Nice.
and so we play basketball together too. And she's just great. She's
Mhm.
really a wonderful human being, and kind and thoughtful, and just has become a good friend.
That is cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Sam?
Yeah, similar. I would say our neighbors.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. We have actually a family that lives right next door. She's the director of the tutorial that Rocky goes to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm on their board of directors. So there's which is outside of, it's not we didn't meet at church. We met just moving in next door.
Mm-hmm.
And then same with our neighbors across the street. They had kids around Rocky's age when we moved there. And so another family that we've just gotten close to. So
I love that.
yeah.
Yeah, same. Neighbors. We live in a very social neighborhood.
Yeah,
so
Very
people-
social.
Yeah.
Like parades that
Events
are
that's
all the
fun.
time.
that are
Yeah.
thematic
It's very
parades and
fun.
all.
Yeah. So
That's awesome.
And like parents of my kids' friends.
Mhm.
That really didn't start until my oldest child turned about 5 or 6.
Mhm.
But that's been really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
The one that comes to mind from Nashville is the very first week we moved here and we opened our office. The woman across the hall, who is a lawyer and has a law practice, came into our office and said, "What are you all doing in here?" Like basically like,
That's awesome.
"Well, I want to figure this out." And so we showed her around, and we have in our conference room, we have the rock star or rock guitar,
Rock
whatever,
band.
rock band
Rock band, yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So she played the
That's
guitar.
awesome.
That's
and
awesome.
so we became friends with her and her husband. And in fact, I just saw a movie with her husband a couple nights ago.
Oh, that's cool.
And so that was very fun. But she came in the door literally going,
Busting
yeah,
in.
busting
What
in.
are you guys
Uh-huh.
doing
That was
around here?
super
That's
fun.
funny.
Yeah, we watched the Super Bowl with them
Oh,
and
that's
some other
cool.
people, and it was very good.
That's awesome.
So that's actually a good lead into what we want to talk about. And that is, when you're a kid, relationships, friendships are kind of baked in.
Mhm.
You have classmates, you have teammates, you have kids in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And when you go to college, it's the same way. You're living with people, you're in the same dorm, you're down the hall from somebody.
Yeah.
But then, man, it gets weird in adulthood,
Mhm.
right? You kind of move into this time of life where, how do I make
Yeah.
friends?
Right.
So I think it would be a great idea for us to talk about just some practical applications of how do you make friends as an adult? A lot of people moving to a new town, a lot of people who are in a time of life where they're maybe cut off from previous relationships.
Or when you get married.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when
I
you get
find that
married.
when people get married, their friend groups totally change.
Same with kids too. I think.
Right, yeah.
When you have kids.
Yeah.
It's like you go through a portal when you get married
Yeah.
and you're in a different world, and then you
Right.
go through another portal
Right.
when you have kids. And
For sure.
yeah, and there are all these other different portals. Like there's the infertility portal,
Right.
there's
Yep.
the adoption portal. Like, it depends on what portal you're going through of
Yeah.
where you get.
That's good.
So any thoughts about, obviously we want to say church community is a great place to build relationships. I mean, that's, and we certainly have developed some really good friendships
Yeah.
at Journey. But any other thoughts about the how you do this? It's interesting, the neighbor piece.
Yeah.
But any other thoughts about how does a person be intentional in building adult friendships?
Well, I'll tell you one. There's a guy that stands out to me that I met a few years ago, and he's a songwriter, and he literally would just show up at a coffee shop, and he would sit in the coffee shop, and he'd be journaling and writing, but he was intentional about, like, I literally, he came to Journey, and so I had met him here, but I didn't know him at all, and really actually started to interact with him in one of those moments. We were both at the factory. I was drinking coffee with somebody, and then they left, and so then here's just Dennis and I, and Dennis just was intentional about engaging that, and he would take those opportunities. Now I know that's not everybody, but
That's good though.
He went after it. You know.
He's an unusual person.
He is, yes.
I mean, in the best way.
That's right.
He sits in coffee shops and just talks to people.
Yeah. Just asks,
really
dives
great.
into their stories a little bit. He's really good at feeling out like that entry point with somebody, and then So I thought that was pretty fascinating. Pretty cool way of approaching it.
That is great. I want to come back to that because that's really good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when you brought this up, I instantly thought about friends that I've had whose kids have moved on from the home.
Yeah.
And that's an especially hard time because I think even when you become friends with your kids' friends' parents pretty easily too. And when you don't have that and you don't have a school that you're going to, that's hard. So, I work out at the Y, and the Y in Franklin is like a big social club.
Yeah.
I mean, you can tell that people go there just to be with people that they know that are there at the same time. So, it seems like a lot of the ladies in the exercise classes that I go to have become friends. So that's one way. But gosh, I mean, I think unless you put yourself out there, like volunteering somewhere or just being a part of something, it's hard.
It's challenging.
And I think that's a big part of it is committing to be part of a few things,
Right.
that are create little smaller communities. And Dave and Ellen, I think, have taught me something really important. Like when we moved here to start the practice, I had some built-in relationships. I had grown up here, but it was all new to Dave and Ellen. And, I knew a lot of other people who'd moved to the city and who just a few months in were like, well, I'm always initiating. Everyone already has their friends. There's no point. Like,
That's so hard.
And Dave just said, I mean, I expect to, for the first year, always feel like I'm initiating. That is the first year, is you just slow and steady, not in an anxious way, but you are always pursuing and kind of setting things up. That's the position you're in when you move into any new community, whether it's a college or a new town.
Yeah.
And I might amend that a little bit to say, I think it even goes past a year.
Yeah.
I would say so.
Yeah, because I have the expectation that that's the burden's on me for that. One of my kids, this has been a while ago, said, this is when we lived in Charlotte, said, you and Mom are always going out to lunch with people and doing things. And kind of, how do you do that? And I said, how many times do you think those people have asked us to do it? And I have no idea. I said, under 10%, right? And so I think that's the challenge of adult relationships, is you have to take the initiative without personalizing it as some kind of rejection or something like that. A great story, a person that we worked with came into our practice as a doctoral intern, and she moved from San Francisco, and she was leading a social skills group for high schoolers.
Yeah.
I said, how's the group going? She goes, I've learned so much about social skills from this group. I said, what's the main thing you've learned? She said, well, I'm talking to these guys. They're all nice guys. And all of them are saying, I meet people, we hit it off, we exchange text, and then I'm on the weekend and nothing. What's going on? And she goes, I realized I moved from San Francisco, had all these friends, moved here. I'm meeting all these people. I feel like it's going well. And then I'm feeling lonely.
Yeah.
And what I realized is, the burden's on me. It's always on. And that's okay. Like that's, most adults, this is not great, but most adults don't do that.
Yeah.
They don't initiate.
Right.
And so the point you're making with Dennis is two things that are super important is he's present.
Right.
He's in the mix.
That's right.
And he's initiating.
That's right.
And I think we can't get around the fact that some people just feel like, Why are people not calling or texting or whatever? I think the big light bulb moment is burden's on you.
Yeah.
You got to, even if you're an introvert, you got to figure a way to make that
Yeah.
happen that works for you.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm just agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. You look like you're,
Yeah.
yeah. So that seems like a big piece of it. So let me go in that direction. What do you, for someone who isn't a dentist and an unusual person
Yeah.
in the best way and has that charisma or just isn't an extrovert, if we're saying, look, you got to be in the mix, you got to be out in the muckety muck, and you've got to take some initiative.
Yeah.
How do we help somebody like that who finds it more difficult to do those things, or it might be more introverted?
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes that's
Send
the
them this
question, right?
podcast.
Like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, because I sit with a lot of people
All
who
the time, I'm
are,
sure. Yeah.
kind of feel this, and you're right. I agree. I think that a lot of times what I hear is similar to what you're saying, which is nobody's calling me, nobody, and and I get that. That's hard. But there is some onus on the individual to put themselves out there as well. And some do, and they still kind of feel that way even after. And I think you're right. It might be more than a year that it takes to kind of do that.
I just think it's ongoing.
Yeah, it's ongoing. Yeah. You always got to be in that. Like, and I think as we do that, as we put ourselves out there, well, it's like unless we're out there, nobody even knows that we're there, or that we have a desire for connection, or
Right.
And so a lot of people that I've heard that are lonely, it's like they're not putting themselves in the places where they can become, known, or at least on a deeper level, and kind of start that process. So
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, we tell our kids this all the time, that social media kind of ruins that for us because we think everyone else is out there having fun and I'm left out.
Yeah.
Well, I actually know a lot of adults in that same situation.
A lot.
Somebody else actually just came to mind that I have started a friendship with. It's just a new friendship. We've only gotten together once, but she's really a lovely human being. And I got acquainted with her through a Facebook group that we're both on. And she posted not very long ago, like a very vulnerable post about how lonely and isolated she feels. And she doesn't seem to have her people yet here. She's been here for I don't know how many years, but just doesn't have her people here. And the first thing I thought to myself when I read that was, wow, I would never have guessed that. Because given the way that I see her living her life online, I just assume that she has this great community of people because of the work she does and what she's doing. And that's not the case. So I think, a lot of times we're misled as the lonely person or as the person who's overlooking a potentially great friendship because we look online and we think there's something happening.
they're busy.
That's not. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like, you get a snapshot sometimes of what people want their life to look like.
They're curating the life they want it to look like.
That's right.
But I think that speaks to your question about, well, what if you're an introvert, or what if you don't really have a schedule where you can be doing all these things that people are doing on social media? And I think it's important to realize that your friendship journey might look really differently than somebody else's. Like for me, I can't go to lunch in the middle of the day with my friends. I can't, that's not something I can do, but we can get together after the kids go to bed on my back porch and hang out for an hour. That's kind of how that has to look.
Yeah.
And if you're introverted, you don't have to be throwing really big parties, know, but it can be more one-on-one little coffees and you can spread them out more because they burn you out and,
Well, I think in our, like Angie and I, as our kids, we have a couple kids that are older. And so I think for us, a lot of it has been just being intentional and sometimes even creative in the way that you approach the things that you're doing, it doesn't, just the kind of, we're just going to show up and everybody's going to be there. That just doesn't happen anymore, really, with just the way life works with for us with kids. And so we have to be intentional. And sometimes it is that, hey, we're doing it later in the evening, or, me and some of the guys are going to meet up at Asgard and hang out for, you have to just find those times.
What's Asgard?
It's a great bar in Columbia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Sounds very mockable.
The
name.
I was going to say, isn't that a place in Lord of the Rings?
Well, no, it's Thor. Yeah.
Oh,
It's like
I knew it was
their afterlife
something.
place. Yeah.
One of those
Oh,
things.
yeah.
Something like that. But
Asgard.
yeah, but I totally agree. Just being creative sometimes with how we have to approach it. That's what we've experienced, Yeah.
You said something earlier that
Okay.
I just want to pick up on, and that was talking about sitting with some people that struggle because they're more introverted and without naming any names, I think we both know some people here that tend to be more introverted, tend to be a little more curmudgeonly, tend to be a little more, who have in to their credit have put themselves
Yes.
in circulation.
Yes.
Right? They've been present,
They're
not just
showing
on
up.
Sundays. They come to, whether it's a men's event or women's event.
Yes.
They go to a table that we have here, like, which is dinner together.
Yep.
I mean, I love that because for them, that's an effortful thing.
It's a huge
Yeah.
risk.
Yeah.
it
For
feels
me,
like
it's
in
not
lots
an
of ways.
effortful
Right.
thing, but for them, it's hard.
Yeah.
So I really, and so I think I would use that to encourage other people to say, don't let yourself off the hook if you're more introverted or it's tougher for you. The fact that it's tougher doesn't mean you can't do it.
Right.
The fact that it's tougher, that maybe you're socially anxious or that you're introverted, that's actually how people get better. If someone's socially anxious, they don't get better by avoiding.
Right.
They get better
Yeah.
by being
Pushing
in it
into
and
it.
feeling all the feels of it. And so I would just encourage people to not let themselves hang on to this notion of themselves that
Yeah.
they're not a person who can take initiative.
Well, and I think sometimes if people stay in that place, they that rejection tends to feel bigger and more over time
Yeah,
too,
right.
right?
It
Or
reinforces.
it's not even a rejection; it's just that people don't even know, but they feel a rejection from that somehow, So yeah,
That's a good point.
So here's a harder point to make.
okay,
So maybe someone's out there and they have put themselves out there and it's just nothing's happening. And some of that might be circumstances, some of it might be the people that they're trying to connect with, but there may be some things that they need to develop in themselves or work on in themselves. And so sometimes in my job, Lauren's job, we're in a position of saying, this is how you're coming across, or this is something that, and that's sometimes a great conversation, sometimes really
hard, yeah.
hard to do. But any thoughts about the giving of feedback to people? And we'll talk about what that looks like bigger in a second, but just being able to do that in terms of someone's social style or interpersonal style.
Yeah, I think as long as it's done with care and love, it can be really, really helpful to say, hey, when other people talk, you don't seem like you're attending, or it seems like there's a trend where you're a good storyteller, but you tend to be the hero of the story in a lot of the stories, and you're not listening to the other. Or how can you get the other person to talk more? Be curious, not just say, this is how you're coming across, and it's not good, but to give some tips on what could you change.
yeah,
Yeah. Any thoughts for you guys?
That feels
about
really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
yeah. It is hard.
I know.
I think, but it's also like sometimes that hard is really worth it because I just think of a couple instances where I had a similar conversation, with people who were feeling stuck in that way. And, when I think about it, like one of them really started to get curious and received it, I guess you could say. The other, I think, tried for a while and then kind of felt like it wasn't worth it and kind of pulled back, So, so how to have that conversation well is.
Well, in a therapist role, like they're expecting that. That's
Right,
why they're
right.
there,
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think in a role like yours or in a
Yep.
friendship, you'd really want someone to ask you
Right.
before you let into
Yes.
that,
Right.
and
Which that happened to me the last time
Okay.
I was in that situation.
Someone asked you.
Yeah.
No, they didn't ask.
Oh,
Yeah.
But I
Oh,
let-
and you, but
Yes.
you went ahead and shared.
I did share.
Okay. Did
And
it
it
go over
wasn't
well?
received very
Okay.
well.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And that's
No.
a good thing to experience because I think for me, rule of thumb is I don't go where I'm not invited.
Right.
Yeah.
Usually. But even when you're invited, a lot of time I've had people in my life who are like, give me feedback about
Yeah.
this. And when
Yeah.
you do, then they get really mad.
Yeah.
And then they don't want to talk to you anymore.
Yeah.
So you have to suss that out too, which is sometimes a tricky thing is they want to be reassured. They don't want anything that's going to be provocative in terms of what they might need to change.
Yeah.
So some of that's just a judgment call, sussing that out.
Because they're already feeling badly about themselves. They're having trouble making
Right.
friends.
Right.
So then to say, you're coming across in this negative way, it's a little bit of kicking them while they're down sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's just very hard to receive.
But if someone can get to a posture of give me feedback
Yeah.
and you feel like they could receive it, like your person you're talking about, that's good.
Yeah.
You know what comes to mind just really practically is, do you remember back in the day there was the book How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Yeah.
Back in 1940, and most books, if they sell for like 2 or 3 years and no one buys them again. This book was a bestseller for the entire decade of the 1940s.
I think it still might be.
50s, 60s, 70s. It's still a bestseller. One of the top 5 best-selling nonfiction books in history.
I don't know that I realized it was that old.
100,000 copies a year or something like that. It's
That's incredible.
college courses taught on it. And there are a bunch of points, but the main point that if you could take away one thing is, if you want to be good socially, don't worry about what story you're going to tell. Don't worry about being funny or smart or impressing people. Be genuinely curious about other people, right? Approach interactions with genuine curiosity.
Yeah.
Ask them good questions and then follow up with questions. If you ask a question, then you just drop it. It's the message is, I didn't really care about what you said.
Yeah.
But if
I'm
you're
waiting
really
for you to
curious
ask me.
and you ask them another good question. And if you want a really, really good question to ask, it's not even a question. It's a directive. And it is, tell me about blank. Tell me about your week. Tell me about what you got coming up. Tell me about what you do for fun. That's sort of like if you need one ringer, like back pocket approach.
Tell me about X.
Tell me about X.
Yeah.
You know, near past, near future.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great and easy kind of entry point for people who may be even a little more introverted. Is that fair, do you think?
Very fair, yeah.
Because it's not saying, hey, you need to be in the center of the room here. You're just getting curious about like this one person that you're by or
if
with.
you can light up your nonverbals and smile and nod and make eye contact and then ask curious questions, then most people are going to like that.
Yeah.
That's all you need to do. You don't need to come in and be the sort of the life of the party.
Yeah.
You can be the person that's just having a good one-on-one conversation.
That's right.
Yeah, because a lot of people feel like, oh, I need to have something in common with them to have something to talk about. And that's just not true. I could sit by a rocket scientist and think, I know nothing about your job at all. But get them talking. Because if I'm good at asking open-ended questions and following up, we could have a lot of back and forths.
Yeah. You could have a half-hour conversation on what he does or she does and not know anything about it as a way of putting them in a position where they're talking about the thing that they do and love and that kind of thing.
I'm doing premarital with a rocket scientist right now.
Are you
Talk
really?
about it.
You are. I was just thinking that.
You said rocket scientist.
I kind of was like, is it even a real job?
It
In
is.
my
Yeah,
head,
it
I
is.
thought,
It is a real
it's
job. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
We
a
have
thing.
a rocket scientist in this,
journey.
in this
Amazing.
community.
And apparently getting
married.
All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That is
So-
fantastic.
Yeah. Fascinating.
All right. Last call.
Okay.
Any last practical suggestions about where, how, any of that stuff that'd be helpful in building adult relationships?
Well, I mean, an obvious one is a church community. You know, finding a church community, I think, is a great place. Forever they've, maybe not this way now, but it has been kind of a center of community. And so, I still think it's a beautiful way to meet people. Who share, some likeness and like-mindedness, and not that that's always what you need, but that's usually an easier starting point anyway. So,
and one of the things I appreciate about this church community, and I'm not doing this as a plug, but is that there is a culture of we don't have to agree.
that's right. That's right.
Even if we're not like-minded, it's great if we are, but if we're not, then we can still have.
But
a
we value
relationship.
the pressing into each other.
and like the back and forth
that's
on
right.
things.
It's
That's
important.
really good.
I would say serve other people. So, I mean, whether that's in a church or, hands-on Nashville or people loving Nashville, like there's all kinds of really great organizations around most cities where you can go and serve other people. And I think that helps. It just inherently helps you get outside of yourself and seeing the world as not just centered around, because we tend to be pretty self-centered, especially when we're going through a hard time. But that's such a great way to go shoulder to shoulder with people and meet people. And you already then have something in common, a shared experience, if you're serving somewhere together.
Excellent.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's it.
Good.
All right. Well, this has been good follow-up.
thank you.
Suzie, thanks so much for being back with
Yes.
us.
Thanks for having me.
We want you to come anytime you can.
That's right.
Gladly.
Well, that's Suzie Lynn. This is Sam Barnhart. This is Lauren King. I'm Dave Verhaagen. This has been another episode of Journey on My Mind. See you next time.